Welcome along to episode 8 of the Matchbook Cheltenham Trail. I'm your host, Daniel Hussey. Delighted to welcome, as always, Matt Toombs. Rest assured, Donn McClean will be back with us next week. But delighted to welcome also our first guest of the series as we bring guests through all the way to the Cheltenham Festival. It's Matchbook Horse Racing Podcast contributor, Dan Overall. Dan, welcome along. You're probably delighted you get a chance to just talk Cheltenham for the next few minutes.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've been trying to do it for the last several months, to be honest. But yeah, anytime I get a chance to talk about Cheltenham, it's more than welcome. Maybe not be able to replicate Donn's, obviously, insight, but I'll give it my best shot anyway.
Yeah, Matt, you're looking forward to it. We have a new voice on the podcast now, new ideas. There's a few rumours that he might have a few handicap shouts already, so there's plenty to discuss today.
Yeah, and always keen to hear new ideas, new voices. But the handicaps, we're just getting to that sort of stage now where people are starting to think about handicaps. The entries aren't until next month, but you certainly want to be drawing up little shortlists in your notebook of horses that have caught your eye. So good time to be looking at that, I think.
Okay, we have a lot to discuss. It's our first one of the series. We're going to focus on a couple of races. We've decided to group them in each week. It's complicated based on what races are happening. We're sort of, we have to sort of go with the calendar a little bit, but we're going to cover the Gold Cup and the Ryanair at the end of this show. So stay tuned for that. Do check out timestamps in the description if you want to skip ahead straight to those previews. We're going to do the normal weekend review, Eyecatchers, and then there's a fun section at the end where our guest sort of picks what they want to talk about Cheltenham Anti-Post, and Dan Overall has decided to focus on the Cheltenham handicaps, of course. So very much looking forward to that. If you are watching us on YouTube, do hit that like button. Be much appreciated. Takes 2 seconds, and subscribe completely for free on our YouTube channel. If you're listening on the podcast as well, do hit that 5-star review wherever you are listening. But we will start with a weekend review, and which was ultimately a quiet enough weekend considering the cancellations, but still some good racing, and probably the highlight of the weekend. We're going to start with Matt here as he hits a trend and talk briefly about it. The Kinloch Bray, Matt. Allaho was, it seemed a bit of a freebie he got, so it's probably hard to sort of judge, but Twitter, as usual, was split opinionated. It felt like you had to be he ran superbly or he ran terribly, where, in my opinion, the reality is it was somewhere in the middle.
I think you're spot on. Yeah, the winners are 5 from 11 in the 3 open Grade 1 chases at the festival this century. 23 point, 207% profit. 4 of the losers were placed. So though a Grade 2, briefly a Grade 3, this has tended to be a hot contest. Sizing John and Don Cossack followed up in the Gold Cup. Allaho twice in the Ryanair, Newmill in the Champion Chase. And Native Upmanship was second in the Champion Chase twice after winning this. Had the Ryanair existed in his time, you'd imagine he'd have taken all the beating in it. And it looked like being another strong renewal, but Envoy Alain Capadano coming out, ground winning against French Dynamite. The Mercurial appreciate it, either not on a going day or not like being held up when forcing tactics have worked so well in the John Durkan. That left Allaho with just the former National Hunt Chase winner Statler to beat. He did it with a minimum of fuss. Statler wasn't deemed good enough for any Grade 1 entries at the festival. Willie was going Hunter Chase with him until he found out he wasn't eligible. You can only beat what's put in front of you, but Paul Townend wasn't exactly gushing afterwards. So Allaho's won a couple of Grade 2s, close to the King George, still clearly a high-class horse. But as we'll discuss when we get to the Ryanair, I don't think he's got quite the same pizzazz now.
Yeah, Dan, we won't talk too much about the Ryanair for the moment, but I guess the performance overall, and look, it's maybe touching on appreciate it because he would have been going into the race the biggest danger to Allaho, and who knew that holding up appreciate it doesn't really work after all these years.
I know, it's so frustrating, isn't it? Obviously, a really encouraging start to the season with Appreciate It under positive tactics. You're thinking, right, okay, there's a building block to work on here, and then he rocks up against Allaho, and no one can dare take on Allaho, unfortunately, especially when Willie has 3 of the 4 in the running, so he's held up and he doesn't run his race. It's entirely predictable, but quite annoying, really. I mean, I say we'll touch on Ryanair later, but Allaho will not get an uncontested lead in the Ryanair, and realistically speaking, the one race he's been in the season, he would have finished 4th in it had Shishkin stood up. So I don't think we learned too much. French Dynamite was found to have blood in his trachea after the race, so that kind of explains his very disappointing performance as well. And as you say, Statler, first maybe spark that he's shown in a while, but whether that's really going to set him up for anything this season, I'd be quite doubtful.
Yeah. No, again, we'll touch on a lot of these horses when it comes to the Ryanair, perhaps. I want to focus on the Lightning Novices Chase. Matt, we'll get a trend for you and then get Dan's takeaway on the race. But JPR one was, quite impressive. I thought it was a pretty good card overall, and it just sort of, it's great to see other tracks sort of represented, potentially Cheltenham superstars than we normally get.
So the trend is that this century in the Arkle, winners are 1 from 12, runners are 2 from 30. Race was first run in 1979, and Shishkin's the only horse to do the double. It's been a weak Grade 2, and to me this looked like another renewal that's unlikely to have much of an impact on the Arkle.
Okay, Dan, take it away. Were you impressed at all with the winner?
I did like the way he went through the race. Obviously, travelled pretty powerfully throughout. Jumped well, I thought, in the main. Obviously, it's probably the first occasion he's been in a decent race and not blundered at the second last, which was nice to see. Obviously, the incident at Cheltenham, then in the Sandown as well, we made a mistake 2 out. So nice to see him put in a clean round without a late error. Look, I think he's a very likeable horse. I don't think he's going to be in the shake-up to Whittle. He's definitely the type of horse they'll go there with, and he may run into a place in a year where, obviously, outside of Marine Nationale, since Facile Vega's disappointed, lacks maybe some depth outside of the likes of Hunter Jean and Calixios. Can definitely see him running well. I'd make him the early anti-post favourite for the Holden Gold Cup. I'd say that's probably where we'll see him at the start of next season. So I think there's a lot to like about him, but I don't think he'll be challenging for Grade 1 honours at Cheltenham. Obviously, it was a bit of a carnage race at the first. Obviously, Matata went markedly out to his left. Jello got broadsided. Master Chewy was badly hampered, and that kind of ended his race. I mean, it was actually impressive for him to even stay in the contest. I think they'll probably go to the Arkle with him as well, given his rating. And obviously, Nigel Twiston-Davies not exactly shy of going for the big races. An interesting race. Obviously, they all looked fairly evenly matched on what they'd achieved so far on the term. So it was open and going into it. I think JPL1 probably won with a bit more in hand than the winning margin eventually suggested. But I'd say if you were realistically speaking about their chances, they'd probably be more Grand Annual types than Arkle winners.
Yeah, Matt, you can make the case just given, and we've seen this Arkle down through the years, there tends to be, luckily for most of us in racing, at least one superstar in the Arkle, which sort of makes a lot of horses defer to the Turners, perhaps. So it could potentially be a small field like we've seen in recent years that maybe a JPR1 could perhaps be overpriced at the moment.
Absolutely. I think it's likely to get 6 or 7 runners. Marine Nationale will scare a few off. Partly depends on what happens with Gaelic Warrior, because if he looks equally brilliant in the Turners, then there's less of an incentive to go there. I'm just a bit worried that because the 2 mile British novice division is so weak, some of these horses may end up getting themselves badly handicapped for the Grand Annual. JPR1 was on 145 here. That didn't look a great mark, and he may well go up a bit next week. So I think it's one of those where they might be better off waiting for something like the Maghull at Aintree, because if the Irish stay at home for that, that might be the best chance some of these have of picking up a big pot in the spring. Okay, good race nonetheless, but maybe not perhaps going to be featuring at the high end of the Arkle. We'll move on to Le Homme Presse, Dan. This was brilliantly, like, I had this marked in the weekend calendar on Sunday to tune in for this, and it didn't disappoint. I thought it was a really, first of all, great to see Le Homme Presse back. I thought the interview with the owner on ITV Racing was exceptional. I just thought it was a great news story, and not often these horses come back. And I know it's only against Protectorat, so maybe there's not much in the form perhaps, and he does go well fresh, but still brilliant to see him back.
Oh, yeah, I'm a massive fan of Le Homme Presse. I have been ever since his early novice chase campaign and how good he looked there. I was massively keen on him for the King George. And I think, bearing in mind, he went into the King George seemingly with an injury and how markedly he jumped out that day. I think it was an immense performance, even though he fell and was beaten behind Brave Man's Game. And obviously, I think that season they were trying to build backwards from the Gold Cup, and they left themselves a bit kicking themselves, really, for going for the King George when they didn't need to. Obviously, then they've been on a massive recovery mission. It's seemingly been more delicate to get him back than maybe initially thought. When you obviously listen to the interviews you say, Dan, and some of them were extremely emotional, it seems to have been a real journey for them. So to get him back and to get him to win, bearing in mind early on, he did not look to be going a yard. Like, he headbutted the first, and then Charlie Deutsch was having a few looks down. Seemingly, it could have been pulled up early, and that would have been that. It wouldn't have surprised me after the way he went through the race for the first mile, but I think Charlie Deutsch, very sympathetic rider, gave him time to get into it. He still said he wasn't really happy until downhill part turning for home, and then he loomed up alongside Protectorat, and he just seemed to be going better, and that was that. I mean, he probably won a bit more cosily than the eventual winning margin suggests. Obviously, he had a long absence to defy. Although he has gone well fresh, he would not have been cherry ripe for that by any stretch of the imagination. And I don't see any reason why Protectorat hasn't run a race that's nearly up there with his best. He seemed to be enjoying it out in front, looked really enthusiastic, jumped well. And obviously, they pulled a mile clear of some horses rated in the 150. So I think it's a reasonable level of form given the actual race and how it panned out. Just great to see Le Homme Presse back. I've long been the opinion that he was the best British novice chaser when he won the Brown Advisory a couple of years ago. He's capable of putting in a performance that is worthy of winning a Gold Cup. Obviously, we'll touch on that later to come. He may well go to Ascot, which would be interesting. Obviously, a 3 quick races very close together after a long absence, but great to see him back. He's one of my favourite horses in training. Obviously, I think you can see with the emotion afterwards what it meant to everyone as well.
Yeah, no, the story is great, and again, the interview, I'd urge people to look at that on ITV's social channels. Dan touched on Protectorate again throughout the race. Similar to Dan, I thought he was jumping better. He looked like he was back to his old self again. So maybe he's one to keep an eye on too.
Yeah, I think he really benefited from that confidence boosting ride he got last time in the handicap at Cheltenham. He's probably going to be a hard horse to place. He's clearly not going to be championship level. There are plenty of weak graded races in Britain. He may have another one of them left in him. One point about L'Empresse and the going well fresh, as Dan said, it might be that he wasn't that fit for this because this was a delayed reappearance. But he's won on all 4 seasonal debuts for Venetia. On 2 of the previous 3 seasons, on Racing Post Racings, he regressed on his second run. So whether he is the sort of horse that would have that classic one run and then it would be a problem going straight to the Gold Cup, and that's why they want to go to the Ascot chase, that might be it. So I might not be expecting fireworks there. And if you are thinking about backing him, my gut feel is to wait until after he's run in that race.
Okay. Some advice there from the guys, and we'll speak a little bit more about L'Empresse at the end of the show. Again, check out timestamps in the description if you want to skip ahead. High Class Hero, Matt. A lot of people talk about this horse for the Albert Bartlett. It was not workmanlike, but it got the job done pretty well, although his odds would suggest that's what he should have done.
Yeah, Monkfish won this en route to winning the Albert Bartlett. They absolutely crawled here, even allowing for the ground. Speed gun was down at 20 miles an hour for some of the first circuit. So it wasn't a test of stamina. Danny Mullins on What Path looked behind him 3 or 4 occasions in the second half of the race, checking where Paul was on High Class Hero. Perhaps Danny thought a sprint would suit his horse, but the opposite proved true. He looked like being left well behind when the sprint started between the last 2 flights. But whilst it took him a while to get going, he flew home, only beaten 2.5 lengths. By the time they got to the bend past the winning post, he was in front. So perhaps the ground having gone against What Path, Danny didn't want to give him a hard race. Whatever the reason, he does look like a fast run race on a sound surface. Could see him to much better effect. He's the type to go well at huge odds in the Albert Bartlett if he gets his conditions. High Class Hero returning from a 3-month break, having run up hat-trick in the autumn, and the race panned out perfectly for him. Looked like he was going to win easily. Wasn't great at the last, just stayed on the one pace under pressure on the run-in. Willie said he went for this race rather than the 2 mile 6 grade 1 at DRF, give him a bit more time to recover. Suspicion was that he wasn't that tuned up for this, so he should improve plenty. He's favourite in some books for the Albert Bartlett now, whilst he's definitely a contender. It's important to remember 9 of the last 10 winners have gone off double-figure prices, very unpredictable race. And that's because so many of the runners have been running in steadily run, small field races on slow ground, like this. When they get a quicker surface, 20 runners going a good gallop produces a completely different challenge and often suits a totally different type. You don't know how they'll react till they try it, but High Class Hero has the profile I like to take on in that race at the shortest price. For all, I think he's an excellent longer-term prospect. Finally, Easy Fellas, he's the old school Albert Bartlett horse, 2nd season novice, 11 runs under his belt over hurdles. He found for pressure, kept the favourite honest, but even allowing for the potential improvement for switching to Henry de Bromhead, he doesn't quite look to have the class for the race the Albert Bartlett's become these days.
Yeah, Dan, interesting points there from Matt on, like, you're essentially going into the Albert Bartlett and that way that race is run is nearly a different sport to what a lot of these horses are running during the winter.
Yeah, and I think that's especially true of High Class Hero. I mean, in some respects, I think people will look at him on paper and say, well, some of his form reads pretty well. Obviously, beating Tagman and the Big Doyen has worked out reasonably well. And for all that he has experience, which people look for, his experience is in completely different races to the challenge you'll face in March, as Matt said. Generally, it's been very small fields, slowly run races. The only hurdle race he running with a double-figure field was his first one in the maiden hurdle when he made all and didn't see another horse. So it's really hard to assess how he'll deal with a test that the Albert Bartlett will provide. His jumping isn't always the best either. Like, he does seem to love a bunny hop at the last as well. I mean, it might be the fastest bunny hop I've ever seen at Limerick on his second most recent start. Like, it was unbelievable. Actually gained lengths despite some of those unorthodox technique you'll ever see. But he does have questions to answer going into the Albert Bartlett, and I think he'll be a really divisive horse, especially as we get into the Cheltenham Festival preview sessions. I think some will think, well, he's just been probably inconvenienced by these race types. I think others will point out that he hasn't really had a test that's anything akin to an Albert Bartlett, and that his price is worth taking on. I think I'd be of the opinion, like Matt, I wouldn't be in a rush to back him currently. I think the race will be inevitably be a big field with plenty of live contenders at a big price. And what I do think he has plenty of talent, and clearly he had the class on this occasion to benefit from the slow pace and beat some half-decent rivals. The Albert Bartlett's going to be a whole different kettle of fish.
Yeah, we might become a little bit clearer after the DRF, the Albert Bartlett picture. That is, we will stick with you, Dan, for our last race, covering in full on the weekend review, the Mayor's Novice Chase. What do you make of it?
Yeah, it's a strange one, isn't it, really? Because the three that featured, obviously, Hautier, Harmonia Maker, and Silent Approach, have all just taken turns beating each other. I mean, they've all finished in various orders in 3 different starts this season, so it's really hard to know what to make of it. I think when she's on form, Harmonia Maker is a very good mare, and I think she's shown it in glimpses, but she just has such a patchy profile. It's hard to really trust her, especially if you're looking with a view to the Mayor's Chase at Cheltenham. I don't think Dino Blue was particularly scared by any of these. Obviously, Dino Blue's stamina is still an unknown going into that race, but I think on the pure class angle, she would be head and shoulders above these. The Hautier was getting maybe as one of the each way angles into the race going into it. Obviously went off a really short price for this, despite carrying a penalty. Just never looked like getting on terms of Harmonia Maker, and maybe she just needs a real stamina test, maybe a more 3 mile type, which the new course at Cheltenham 2 mile 5 may well suit her if the ground is testing, but I don't think there's any real doubt that Dino Blue would be a classier mare than her. Harmonia Maker would be capable on a going day of getting into the shake-up there. I think maybe the campaigning of Silent Approach has been maybe slightly interesting as well. Obviously, only a week after her third to Spillans Tower and then running her so quickly afterwards. I think that told in the end there. So interesting race, but bearing in mind how these three have really just been trading punches throughout the season, it's hard to have a definitive view on how this race really stacks up. And it could just be that they're all at a very similar level and could beat each other on any given occasion.
Yeah, Matt, Dan raised Dino Blue there, obviously heavy favourite for the Mayor's Chase. And I guess there is always that question mark on the stamina that maybe a horse with less class could perhaps get her.
Yeah, absolutely. It'd be, again, one of those divisive questions going into the preview night circuit about whether she'll stay or not. If you believe the bare form of a win at Christmas, then she's got an excellent chance. You could argue she should be odds on. These are, as Dan said, these three all beat themselves. It's a very murky picture. The way I've tried to look at it, because with 2 of the 3 renewals of the Mayor's Chase having fallen to novices, and Cole Reevy won this 3 years ago en route to winning the inaugural renewal, I've been trying to find a novice, an up-and-comer all season. How Could It Tuber was the one I was interested in, but she's injured. I did get close to backing Silent Approach a couple of weeks ago. Brilliant jumper, liable to be overlooked for a small yard that's really focused on breeding rather than training. I'm glad I didn't. As Dan said, ran in the Kalini last week, 8th start of the season. She travelled best into this, but just flattened out, and presumably it came too quickly. So with her, I just want to see whether she's freshened up now for March. If she runs again in the interim, then I probably wouldn't be interested. Oturie really on her toes beforehand. Didn't jump well. Consequence, didn't travel in the same way as when beating the winner over a quarter of a mile further at Limerick. She gives the impression that she's been running in the Mayor's Novice Grade 2s because they're there, rather than in races over a trip that suits her. Her class and stamina got her to within a length and a half here. She looks well worth a try at 3 miles. I'd imagine things would be happening too quickly for her if she ran in the Mayor's Chase. Harmonia make a different type, having more pace. Some of Gordon's haven't been finishing out their races over the previous couple of weeks, but he had the first 2 winners on the card. That cold or whatever it was that was affecting the yard seems to have passed through. Frost probably helping. She was probably taking advantage of her 2 principal rivals not being at her best here. She's about 21.0 for the Mayor's Chase. Looks about right. She's got place prospects, but I think she'll find 1 or 2 too good.
Yeah, Gordon's ran pretty well overall, I think, at Navan. So, yeah, they seem to have gotten over that slight hump that seemed to last a couple of weeks just with a lot of their horses. We will go to our Eyecatchers. And Dan, we'll start with you on the Eyecatchers. You're an Eyecatcher man. You've always mentioned horses throughout and Jumpers to Follow show on Matchbook. So I'm sure you're chomping at the bit here to give us your 3 to keep an eye on over the next coming weeks and months.
Well, it's a good thing he really limits to 3, and good thing the weather kind of limited us to 3 as well, really, given we only had 2 days of racing to go on. Under some of the most bizarre weather we've seen in recent times, and now we're battling that storm after storm as well. I mean, God knows what will go on this week. But the 3 that kind of I was interested in, first one was Gal Road, who finished 3rd in the 3 mile handicap at the Lingfield Winter Millions on the Sunday under a top weight, dropping in class, having run pretty well in the long walk under the circumstances. He showed up well for a long way here, got a lot of weight to the front 2 eventually. Obviously, the Nigel Twist and David Yard maybe not going all great guns at the minute. They have a little dip, as they often do at this time of the year. And I think it's worth pointing out that he did actually have a Pertemps qualifier entry at Huntingdon this week. Obviously, won't run there, but they may well be looking that way. And one of the reasons he's very interesting with you to Cheltenham is obviously the Haydock 3 mile handicap earlier in the season where he finished 4th. As Matt pointed out in that episode where you reviewed it, has been a very good trial for Cheltenham handicaps down the line. It's produced 3 winners of the Pertemps final. And I still think he's relatively unexposed as a 3 mile handicap hurdler. So keep an eye on Gal Road if he gets qualified for a Pertemps, or maybe even if he drops back in trip for a Coral Cup where he's run reasonably well in the past. I think he is capable of winning off his current mark. Better Days Ahead was second in the rated novice hurdle at Navan on the Saturday over 2 miles to Asian Master, who's suddenly emerged as somewhat of a supreme dark horse. They're saying they're going to run him, it seems, in the Supreme. Obviously, he's giving over a stone away to most of his rivals. I think he ran respectably, but all of his form is over further. To me, this looked like the case of just getting his 4th run in, so he's qualified for the likes of the Martin Pipe. Obviously, Banbridge and Over the Run were 1-2 in this race in 2022 and finished 1-7 in the Martin Pipe. After that, and Gordon's actually used this race quite a lot with his handicappers. Tronador, Riviere de Tel, Galvin also ran in it before running into Ballymore. So he's used it as a trial for Cheltenham in the past. So keep an eye on Better Days Ahead and what his mark will be for the Martin Pipe. I expect he'll rock up there. And then My Immortal was third to Manila Kakuna and Senior Chief in the 3 mile beginners chase at Navan on Saturday. He was a progressive hurdler last season over 3 miles. Looks to have taken the chase, I think, pretty well. I just think he looks like a handicap project. Maybe not a Cheltenham handicap project. I think he'll be kept probably locally, but keep an eye out for him when he does run in the handicap, because I think they've been minding him with a view to a long-term handicap prospect over fences.
Yeah, shout out to Thomas Costello, by the way, rider who kept the ride on Asian Master, who won that race against Better Days Ahead. 6'4", believe it or not. He is
unreal.
6'4", unbelievable. Yeah, David Jennings would interview him on the Navan race track afterwards. Matt, take away with your 3 eye catchers.
First one is Animal. In any staying chase, but especially marathon chases, getting into a rhythm's vital. In the Surrey National over 3.5 at Lingfield, Animal ran down the first 2 fences, never got into a rhythm. And when you're on a hold-up horse, it's hard to make up the ground when you're out of that rhythm. Animal used a lot of energy to get back into contention, moved the chains, got the first run and flown. Animal jumped better at the business end, stayed on to be 7 lengths second off 118. If he can get into a rhythm in one of these marathons, he looks handicapped to win one, as he should remain on the same sort of mark. Ferns Lock is an eye catcher, but for certain hunter chases and not others. Took his record in points and hunters to 10 from 12, the facile win at Thurles on Sunday. David Christie's trained plenty of the best hunters of recent years, Wing Leader, Vaucelet, but he's never hidden that he thinks Ferns Lock is in a different league. He's only just turned 7. Christie said he's been a bit immature, learning with every run, hence Cheltenham being targeted this year rather than last. Christie's adamant that he'll be better on a sound surface. His breeding backs that up. The only time he's run on one under rules, he blew Billaway away in this race last year, earning a Racing Post rating of 155. He's very classy for a hunter, but the issue is stamina. On both his defeats, he seems to have had the race won, only to look to run out of petrol. Over 3-1 at Ferry House in April and 3 miles at Down Royal at Christmas. So even assuming a sound surface, there must be a big chance he doesn't get home at Cheltenham, for which he's now favourite at about 4.0. I think he'd have a great chance at Aintree or even Punchestown. But if you're going to back him at Cheltenham, I'd leave a short price lay in on the Matchbook Exchange, as I expect him to trade pretty short in running during the final mile. And finally, a little further down the ability chain, Kilteely Park, making her rules debut in a 2.5 mile mares maiden hurdle at Punchestown. She's been a beaten favourite in all 3 points. Really didn't look to know a job for much of the race here. Very green. When Sean Flanagan got after her, she ran on well, beaten just a short head by Anna Lecco, who's completing a hat trick after winning a point at a bumper. You'd hope Kilteely Park would have learned plenty from this. Maidens are obviously going to get less competitive as we move towards the end of the winter and into the spring. She can hopefully win one before the end of the season.
Okay, those 3 eye catchers: Kilteely Park, Ferns Lock, and Animal. And from Dan, Girl Road, Better Days Ahead, and My Immortal. We'll move on to the Gold Cup. Really looking forward to this, the Cheltenham Gold Cup, that is. I'll go through prices in a sec, Matt, but give us your couple of trends that you have initially. I know you've one later on as well.
Yeah, so starting with a couple of general trends. On the day, the Gold Cup's a very predictable race. You might expect that blue riband of racing, every horse primed for the day. So 19 of the 23 winners this century have come from the front 3 in the SP market. But some winners are huge prices before winning their final prep. Sizing John 41.0, Conegry 34.0. And if you're the type of punter that wants to bet at juicy prices, you need to be playing anti-post in the Gold Cup. With the Cotswold Chase, Irish Gold Cup and Denman Chases coming up, this can be the sweet spot for punting. The second trend is to do with experience, which tends to get overbet in the Gold Cup. The up-and-comers, usually the second season chasers, being underbet. The shortest first and second season chaser in the SP market, 9 from 25 this century, 37.147% profit. No standout at the moment. Looks likely to be either Jerry Colombe, who's about 15.0, or Gentleman's Game's about 24.0. Gentleman's Game's going straight to Cheltenham. Wouldn't surprise me if Jerry Colombe did too. Given their profiles, the market's likely to be a decent guide to their prospects if they don't run again. For those who like momentum punting, they're two to consider if the vibes are strong in the run-up to the festival.
Okay, Dan, yeah, I'll just take you through some of the prices we have currently on the Matchbook Betting Exchange. Best price on a lot of these horses. You're backing them all in, but again, most of the sports books are still all in and not no runner, no bet. Gallopin de Champ 2.42 on the Matchbook Betting Exchange. Faster Slow 7.8, Shiskin 11.0, the Han Presse 12.0, Jerry Colombe 16.5, and you have Hewitt there at around 20.0. Just at the moment, give us your sort of thoughts about the Gold Cup and where you're sort of seeing yourself potentially having a bet closer to the time, perhaps.
Yeah, well, I think you have to start with Gallopin de Champs just on the basis that if he does repeat his Gold Cup performance of last season or even his run in the Savills, I think it's hard to imagine anything in here is capable of a performance like that. The question I have is, can he keep backing up these performances? It's not easy to do that, especially as a staying chaser. Obviously, that's a debate that rages about Constitution Hill and whether he can keep up those performances even as a 2-mile hurdler. But as a staying chaser, it would be quite monumental if he can keep doing this and come back to win a Gold Cup. Obviously, he looks likely to run at the Dublin Racing Festival. It wouldn't surprise me if he doesn't perform to the same extent we saw over Christmas, and maybe that'll see him drift slightly. Obviously, Fast or Slow's in there as well. That'll maybe tell us a bit more. You look at the repeat winners of the Gold Cup, they don't tend to be overly raced in the lead up. And I think it's quite interesting that he's having maybe a more aggressive campaign this season than would have been expected. Obviously, Album Photo had one race, obviously, on New Year's Day, and then went straight to the Gold Cup when he won back-to-back. Obviously, Best Mate used to go straight from the King George to Cheltenham, obviously with a nice little break in between. So they were minded with a view to that. And bearing in mind, if Gallopin de Champ goes to the Dublin Racing Festival, he's got to back up an unbelievable performance in the Savills to then run in the Dublin Race Festival, win a tough race against Fast or Slow. Can he keep doing that and performing to that level? If he kind of comes down to the level where we've seen towards the end of the season and the other races, obviously met the John Durkin as well, he is vulnerable. And at 2.42, that's kind of what you're taking into account. That if it just doesn't run up to that best. Fast or Slow, I still find very difficult to assess because despite what he's achieved as a dual Grade 1 winner, we still don't know what level he's really at. Shishkin is a horse I could leave alone. I'm not really interested in him. Jerry Colombe, I think, would be a solid each-way conveyance, especially if the ground is soft. But again, he hasn't shown a level of form yet to suggest he can get to where Gallopin de Champ is at. I do think he underperformed in the Savills. Seemed to get worked up, according to all reports. So I think he's capable of better. I mean, Gentleman's Game, I think, is probably the more interesting betting proposition at this stage. Looks like they're going straight to the Gold Cup. His defeat of Brave Man's Game, you can read in one or two ways, depending on what you think Brave Man's Game performed to that level. I think he's probably been at a very similar level all season. Obviously, he's a young progressive chaser, as Matt mentioned. Those are the types you like to have on side. Although my preferred at this stage is still Lon Presse. We mentioned earlier, I thought he did extremely well to win at Lingfield. I think he had a lot against him. Didn't seem to be going a yard at all. Obviously, my concern with him, though, is whether he can string together runs now. Obviously, he's still fairly unexposed to the chase. So he's only had 9 starts, won 7 of them. He is prolific. He's achieved performances that would get him to within striking distance of a regular Gold Cup. Again, he hasn't got to a level where Pete Gallopin de Champ has either. But I think he could perform to a level that would win an ordinary Gold Cup, and whether the others underperform would be up to them. But he seems versatile. Obviously, a Brown Advisory winner. Obviously, bearing in mind, he's effectively only really having his second full season over fences, given his injury issues last season. He would be where I'd be looking at the minute. It'll be between him and Gentleman's Game. But for Gallopin de Champ, he's the one you have to focus it on. I'm just not sure he can keep backing up these unbelievable performances.
Yeah, so Gentleman's Game, 30.0 currently on the Matchbook Betting Exchange. The home press, as we touched on already, 12.01. So perhaps consider slightly overpriced at the moment, according to Dan. But Matt, on Gallopin de Champ, some good points there from Dan. It's like it's going to be completely different to last year's Gold Cup in one sense, the way they potentially ride him. But also, if he does run in the Irish Gold Cup, it's basically unheard of in the last few years for a horse to be that busy in a campaign and then go in as a very, very short favourite in the Gold Cup, isn't it?
I think Dan's absolutely spot on. It's an excellent analysis of the inherent nature of the Gold Cup and how that applies to Galop and Deschamps. 10 Gold Cups this century have been won by horses in their third season or later. And I think there is a big difference. It's the miles in the legs, and the second season chasers are still gaining experience. So if they have a bit more of a busy campaign, I'm more relaxed about that. But those 10 horses in their third season or later chasing, 8 of them have been off the course for more than 2 months. And one of the others, Native River, have been injured and just made his comeback in the Denman Chase. So the only horse this century in their third season or later to win the Gold Cup, having had what you might call a full season, was Courto Star. Yeah, that's how good you've got to be. I personally think Galop and Deschamps would have a much better chance if he didn't go for the Irish Gold Cup. I think it's great that he looks like he is going to, but I'd be very cautious about backing him at this stage. As Dan said, even if he wins, he might drift a bit if he's workmanlike. So I do want to take him on. I talked a couple of weeks ago about the real whacker. He was about 70.0 then, on the basis he had to shorten a fair bit because of his profile as a Broadway winner. That started about 46.0 now. Intriguingly, there's been a change of plan for him. Rather than going straight to the Gold Cup, he's going for the Cotswold Chase on Saturday. If he wins that in good style, then he's going to shorten up a lot quicker than had he gone straight to Cheltenham. So if you like him, I'd be getting stuck into him over the weekend or before that race. And what I want to do at the moment is highlight Shishkin. He is the one horse I really am going to want to lay in this, especially once the place market's open. There'll be plenty of people who see Ascot as an aberration, say he jumped off okay in the King George, no issue. I don't believe that for a minute. He looks really quirky now. And at Kempton, all the other jockeys obligingly kept walking at the start. I can't believe that's going to happen in the Gold Cup. Someone is going to try and get him to stop. And if he does, there's a good chance he'll plant himself. Even if he jumps off, the stats for veterans are terrible. 0 from 77 this century. 14 of them have started at 9.0 or shorter. So it's not as if they're all no-hopers. I think even if he does jump off, there's a good chance he won't fancy this when the going gets tough. So my lay in this will probably be Shishkin.
Is that 10 years and above, Matt,
yeah,
for veterans?
Yeah.
Okay. So you're, look, Dan, you take every stat in context. It's hard to make any sort of case for Shishkin with that running on the bottom of the screen. 0-77, but 14 of which started at 9.0 or shorter. Your thoughts on Shishkin, because he'll be such a big storyline, potentially the best British chance of the race, the home press aside maybe. It's such a massive storyline going into the Gold Cup, so there'll be a lot of talk about Shishkin. Would he start, for example, as Matt touched on? But yeah, that will give me nerves because in my head he has a squeak.
Yeah, I like Matt. I'm happy to leave him alone. I think he's been proving, not just recently, but I think you really look back at it the last couple of years, that he is getting quirky. And do you really want a quirky horse in a Gold Cup, bearing in mind the test it generally presents? It wouldn't be for me. I think you can say whatever you like about the King George and whether he would have won it or not. I'm not sure that race, realistically speaking, was up to much, as we'll probably touch on with Allaho shortly. But yeah, it wouldn't be for me at all. Would be completely on board with Matt's opinion. Wouldn't touch it with a barge pole.
Okay, Dan, going through some of the other runners. So we've talked Galop and Deschamps. You've touched on Fast or Slow. We've got Shishkin, Jerry Clom, Le Hon Presse, Hewick for you. Matt touched on this last week, so I'll let you have a word. Good ground, potentially coming up at the Gold Cup if the ground dries out Thursday, Friday. Could be in with a squeak given how he ran last year.
I mean, he ran remarkably well from the front in the Gold Cup last year, bearing in mind the ground was on the slow side. So he would be one of those, you could definitely see him maybe Annabelle Fly-esque running into a place and doing something like that. I think it's very hard to imagine him actually winning a Gold Cup based on the circumstances. If he's going there fresh is a plus. Obviously, we know he stays. That's not a doubt. He's just going to need the ground as quick as possible, and that just is unlikely to be as quick as he wants it. They were saying even Kempton was on the slow side for him. I think it's hard to imagine it being even quicker than that. Admirable horse, obviously. He'll always hold a special place in my heart for his antics in this year's King George.
There we go.
I struggled to... I can't not mention... I'll be mentioning it till Kingdom Come. It doesn't happen very often. I just struggled to see him winning a Gold Cup, but I could definitely see him running into third or fourth, maybe.
He's a new LeBake, isn't he, in the Supreme? Hugh back Hewick. Like everyone back Hewick. For sake. But like Matt did,
can say I didn't back LeBake though.
Yeah, that's true. Neither did I. I backed Mellon, and I was see this quirky horse coming on the outside. I couldn't believe it. Anyway, I digress. Matt, the layout of the race, just going through the runners here as we're talking prices. I'm thinking 10-ish runners? Is that sort of ballpark? It's very hard at the moment, but it seems 10-ish runners, like the likes of Envoy Allen going to go Ryanair, aren't they? Hussey, you're probably going Stairs. At least that's the talk at the moment. Cork Rambler, probably, maybe not.
Yeah, I think you might get a few more than that. It will partly depend on what Galopin Deschamps does on the Irish Gold Cup. If he looks bomb-proof, it will scare a few of them away. I think Hussey, you're potentially going to run in the Cotswold Chase at the weekend. So, I mean, he's 120. He was still going great guns when he came down 5 out. And he is very much a spring horse. You know, his form earlier in the season, you can almost just put a straight line through. So, yeah, if someone likes having a couple of quid on a long shot and with a realistic chance, then maybe him. The other one to mention who's completely unexposed is Jungle Boogie. Been incredibly fragile, gone from Willie's to Henry's. Willie did say at the start of last season, you know, he could be anything if he gets to Cheltenham. So he's about 140. He beat Classic Getaway through stamina in that race at Tremorgue. We'll come on to Classic Getaway in a minute, but he looked a real stayer there. Now, I should think it's odds against he even gets to the festival, let alone wins it. But he is one of those horses that we don't know the bottom of yet. So there are a couple of rank outsiders who might give you a bit of fun if you want to have a small bet now.
Yeah, there's some big prices on the Matchbook Betting Exchange. You want to nip in a couple of euro to nip some of those prices in, perhaps. So we've got the thoughts of Matt and Dan for the Gold Cup. Matt sort of thinking Real Whacker is probably his selection there if you had to have a pick ahead of the Cotswold, and Dan leaning towards Le Presse, although a good mention for Gentleman's Game. We'll move on to the Ryanair Chase, and this is an interesting market as well. So, Matt, take it away with your trends and your thoughts on the race, and I'll get prices up.
So, a couple of related trends here. In the last 13 renewals, the top two on BHA ratings, 9 from 31, 8.25% profit. It's been a shallow race. Only 2 of the 16 Grade 1 winners have gone off double-figure prices or from outside the top 3 in the SP market. They're anti-post prices to indicate which horses will go off at the front of the market on the day, but they can change a lot. Ratings can change too, but typically plenty of the runners will line up with their current rating. So the official ratings of the anti-post market leaders: Allahu 173, Stage Star 166, Envoy Lane 164, Banbridge 161, Appreciate It and Classic Getaway 156, Phil Law 155. Not included John Bonner and El Fabiolo in that, not expecting them to turn up. On the basis you'd add £3 or £4 to the Irish marks for the likely BHA mark, then Stage Star, Envoy Lane and Banbridge all be pretty close together, a few pounds behind Allahu. His rating is largely based on form from 2 seasons ago. And out-of-date ratings can obviously be misleading. So the other trend is that in the last 12 renewals, horses that achieved a Racing Post rating of 170 plus that season, 9 from 21, 8.37% profit. Again, ignoring El Fabiolo and John Bond, the 2 qualifiers are Allahu 172 and Stage Star 171. With any trend with an arbitrary line like that, important not to take it literally. Banbridge is on 169 and Envoy Lane's on 167. You then got a drop down to 160 for Appreciate It. So this doesn't tend to be a deep contest. Focusing on obvious things like ratings, whether official or RPRs, can be a good strategy. And looking at this year's renewal, for me, the ground's vital here. I think Banbridge is the most likely winner on a sound surface, right up there with the best novice chasers over intermediate trips last season, scratched on the day of the Turners due to the soft ground. Hadn't had a setback, but missed his early options this season due to bad ground. On his return, he beat a race-fit 162 rated course specialist, Pitt Dorhey, a length and 3/4 at Kempton, getting £3 from the runner-up. Given he'd been ready to run for a while, it's hard to know how much he'll come on for that. But even the bare form makes him a player here. Decent level of improvement will make him a formidable opponent. And given the front of the SP market has such a strong record, I'm anticipating backing Banbridge on the day if he gets his ground. About 5.0 at the moment. Unless Allahu's scratched, he's not going to be that much shorter on the day. And timing is all important in anti-post betting. Given there's the material possibility he doesn't run, makes no sense to back him now. So it'll be with small stakes at the moment, given I think it's odds on Banbridge will run, and therefore I'm likely to back him. There are a few I don't fancy here, so I'm going to take a flyer on the unexposed Classic Getaway. Cost a whopping £570,000 after bolting up on a point. Hacked up on his rules debut in a bumper in May 2021. Clearly been fragile, and he didn't make his hurdles debut until the following January when Willie Mullins bizarrely pitched him into an open minor conditions race on absolutely bottomless ground at Clonmel. That looked to take the edge off him for that season. Last season came back, won a hot beginner's chase at Gore and easily sing off Manella Kakuna, then had another setback. Well, he said it was a rush to get him to punch us down. So I draw a line through that, especially as it was over an extended 3 miles. The Classic Getaway returned this season in a 2 mile 6 listed race at Thurles in late November, giving £4 easily accounting for a couple of mid-150s horses, Auton Claire, French Dynamite with James de Burley, Farrick Delane, Capadano well beaten off. And he looked sure to follow up for much of the race in that 2 mile 7 event on New Year's Day I mentioned. That was on heavy ground at Tremor, didn't stay, collared by Jungle Boogie. Looked to have a hard race there. So before I was having a proper bet, I'd be listening to the vibes from Clersutton. The one advantage of that Tremor race is it made clear his stamina limitation. So he wasn't entered for the Gold Cup. So you know if he goes to Cheltenham, it should be the Ryanair. He looks to have proper open grade 1 level ability. So he is a feasible winner. He's a chancy proposition. He's fragile, hard race at Tremor last time. And he is in the same ownership as Allaho. So whether they'll want Classic Getaway beating Allaho, you don't know. He's entered in the 2 mile 5 handicap at the DRF off 156, which suggests he's showing plenty at home. The Tremor race hasn't bottomed him. He's the one horse at a big price in this that I can see running to 170. So I'm prepared to take a small punt now on Classic Getaway and then reassess the race once the likely ground conditions become clearer.
Okay, in and around 44.0 mark there. Allaho around 3.35 favourite currently. Banbridge 5.6, Stage Star 8.6, Boy Allen 9.2. Likes of John Bond, obviously an unlikely runner 20.0. 24.0 appreciated and bigger prices the rest. And yeah, your thoughts on the Ryanair market, because some good points on Banbridge too. I think by and large people know now is a really good horse. But he gets sort of crabs in a lot of places I see, but I think he's a brilliant horse. I even think that run in the DRF back last February behind El Fabiola was quite good, given it was only 2 miles.
Well, no, exactly that. I think they were kind of almost surprised by him that he was able to show the pace that he was over 2 miles, when obviously Martin Pipe winners traditionally, you'd be thinking more 3 milers. But I think he's continued to surprise in that respect. Like Matt, if Banbridge gets there and the ground is no worse than good to soft and it's raceable for him, I think he's definitely the play in the race. I think quite surprised by how good he was on his reappearance. It looked a really hot race. Obviously, Pic D'Orhy is a very solid, reliable conveyance. And I think he won a shade Cosley there on his seasonal reappearance. I thought that was a really impressive effort. Obviously, he's still lightly raced in that regard. I think there's more to come from him. And I just don't have any interest in Allaho. Again, he's very divisive, because I think anytime you almost say something like that or crab him, it seems like you're coming for the horse personally. But it's nothing to do with that. He's been superb down the years and he's put in some absolutely breathtaking performances. But he's shown nothing this season to suggest he's the same horse that he was a couple of seasons ago. He's had 3 runs this season, 2 of them basically canters round when nothing dared challenge him. We learned nothing about him. And to say his only run, as we mentioned earlier, that was really a race was the King George, where he didn't really seem to go with the same zest, didn't even manage to get to the lead. It was a slowly enough run race as well, and would have finished 4th if Shishkin stood up. So I think it's really hard on that basis to think he should be such a short price for this as a 10-year-old who's had issues, who clearly isn't the force of old. He can run to a standard that's probably somewhere in the mid-160s, I would say, is where maybe his ceiling is now. And that could be enough to win a subpar renewal of this race. But there are some in behind, like Banbridge, who are progressive and younger, and I would generally prefer to side with those. Stage Star, I think, is just now getting to the stage where he's hard to trust. On his day, he's very impressive. I thought the winning the Paddy Power Gold Cup was very good, considering he had competition for the lead and there was a few things that went against him, and he also made that terrible error at the last and managed to recover and win pretty convincingly. Obviously then just completely bombed out next time out, and people are going to blame the ground and the weight. To me, I'm not sure that's as much an excuse, because he just didn't seem to jump with the same fluency. He's had bomb-out efforts as a novice hurdler and a novice chaser, and now as a second season chaser. I think he's just getting to the stage where he is unreliable at the top level. Envoy Len, a lot of people have liked as a solid option, but like Allaho, he's 10 years old. Last year's renewal was pretty poor. The Shishkin didn't run his race. The likes of French Dynamite were only 5 lengths away. Hard to imagine, again, he would be up to winning a good renewal of this race. Appreciate it, probably won't be ridden positively because Allaho's in the race, and obviously Stage Star as well will make the running. So the one, a bigger price that interests me would be Phil Dorr. So he has formed this season behind Dino Blue and El Fabiolo over 2 miles, but he's always looked like that type to get further. And obviously, he was a very high-ranking juvenile hurdler, obviously second in the Triumph Hurdle, and obviously we know those juveniles tend to want further as they go on. His dam is a half-sister to Aplutard, who obviously kept getting further, was performing very well over 2 miles, but obviously in the end ended up a Gold Cup horse. He's only 6 years old. As it looks now, he will be Gordon Elliott's number 1 for this race. Still completely unexposed as a chaser and over trips of 2.5 miles. Last season, obviously, as a 4-5-year-old, was a bit of an awkward one, as it often is for horses of his age, but started the season over fences really well before reverting to hurdles. I think there's still more to come from him, and he's a big enough price to tempt me in, and he would be the way I'd be playing it at this stage anti-post, because they've confirmed it's the target. But like Matt, come the day, Banbridge is on decent ground, he would definitely be my bet.
In and around 27.0, Phil Dorr. Matt, a quick line on maybe Phil Dorr and just runners in general, or how many horses we're probably expecting in the Ryanair. It's sort of in recent years cut up quite a lot on the day that you sort of go, I should have taken a swing maybe this time of year.
Yeah, I suspect this looking open, there might be a slightly bigger field. You know, Allaho isn't going to scare horses off in the same way this year. Definitely see where Dan's coming on. Phil Dorr, he's the one on the up. And as Dan said, you know, he's now in the 5 to 6 season, where you often see these horses go on again. So I can see the case for him. Struggling to find outsiders to put up, as I mentioned. One who's, again, unexposed is Ashtree Meadow, who won the Galway Plate, hasn't been seen since. He is entered for this. He's about 70.0. Again, a bit like Banbridge, ground dependent, would want a sound surface, but goes fresh and is one of those horses on the up. It'd be interesting to see whether Gordon runs him as well.
Okay, Matt, so at the moment you'd probably stay away, or maybe Banbridge on the day. The likes of Envoy Allen 9.2, is that on the day? It's probably going to be in and around that price, maybe slightly shorter if it does cut up.
Yeah, slightly shorter, I think. And Banbridge will probably be a little bit shorter because you've got the uncertainty taken away, anti-post. But I don't think he is going to shorten that much, because a lot of people will back Allaho, I think, on the day, and he's going to hold the price up. I'm with Dan. If there's a sound surface, I'll almost certainly be backing Banbridge on the day.
Okay, Dan, and for you at the moment, Phil Dorr overpriced. If you were having a small play, maybe a small win/win place option.
Yeah, that would be it for me. And again, like Matt, come the day, Banbridge would be my current option on decent ground.
Okay, yeah, be interesting if they come for Allaho on the day, and if he's put in a 3.0, does the money come for Allaho? Then it's you're there sitting on Banbridge. Oh, do I trust the money or not? But yeah, fascinating race. We look forward to that. It's less than 2 months away, isn't it? The Cheltenham Festival. Right, Dan, your favorite time of the year, I suppose, in some ways. The handicap weights aren't even out. And Dan, I wrote down Dan's Cheltenham handicap shortlist, and by the time I wrote out the 5th one, I said this really should be called the long list. But take it away, Dan. Few horses you have on your radar at the moment, because people do want the one handicap selection. And sorry, just to bring in the question we had on this, producer Ryan can get it up on screen now. Trevor Clark on YouTube. Any handicap horses on your radar at the moment? So.
Yeah, you're lucky I didn't go for every single race, because we'd be here till the cows come home. But a few that I'm interested in, or you're opening a door to many things if you ask me to talk about handicaps. So there's 6 that I'll talk about here. The first one has been well publicised is Batman Girac for the Fred Winter. Obviously, he's already got his British mark of 133 off they entered him. He's eye-catching in the Grade 2 over Christmas. And the reason I wanted to mention him, because he's not exactly on the radar. He's favourite for that race now, but I had the word from Michael O'Sullivan through a friend of mine who rode him on that occasion. He basically said he's extremely talented. If he was straightforward, he could have won that race a shade cosily, but he's very quirky and hangs violently out to his left. Like, even there, he was still hanging to his left despite being on the rail. He said he'd probably get away with it on the old course at Cheltenham, but it's something to bear in mind, given that, obviously, the nature of that race. He's probably going to have to be buried on the inside, and he's a relatively short price. So I don't think at his current price he's worth playing at, but one to keep in mind on the day, because he is very talented. In the Coral Cup, a horse called Sam Majest for Willie Mullins, owned by JP McManus. Very interesting. Came over from France with a big reputation. Was very well back to win on his Irish debut at Punchestown, where he disappointed. He ran this season on his reappearance, beating Noble Yates over 2.5 miles in a conditions hurdle. He's only had 4 starts over hurdles, still a 6-year-old. He could be anything still. There's no mark for him. It would be very hard to assess him as well. Just keep an eye out for his entries and his mark, because he could be a real shortener, given his profile, his connections. The Grand Annual, Fernando Civola, I think is being overlooked currently. I think he's around 26.0. There's a lot of talk about some of the novices like my mate Mozzie or St. Mar, but I think Fernando Civola is getting himself very well handicapped. He's down to mark 148 now. He's dropped £8 in 3 runs. Obviously, he has finished second in the Champion Chase previously. The only concern is that he's entered in the Clarence House this weekend and at Doncaster in a handicap. I think he is getting to a stage where he's going to win a handicap. If they went straight to a Grand Annual fresh, obviously he's kind of an old school winner, and he's a specialist 2 mile who's fallen to an attractive mark. He would interest me. In the Plate, Safareur, I think Matt's also a fan of. Gordon Elliott novice, who's run pretty well behind all of the sort of second tier of 2-mile Irish novice chasers this season. He was one of the gambles of the festival last year in the Coral Cup, went off at 7.5 for that race, which, bearing in mind in the Coral Cup, he was 17.0 earlier in the day. That was a hell of a gamble, but just got caught on the worst part of the track, put a line through that. He's bred to stay further, and actually his half-brother was King's Odyssey, who finished third in the plate. He's got loads of entries at the DRF, and he's been given a British mark today of 143, only £2 higher than his Irish mark of 141. So it'll be interesting how they interpret that, but I think he'll improve for 2.5 miles. So keep an eye on him. Not sure where this one will go, but he's just needs to be on any radar with staying handicap chasers in mind. That's Percival Legalwa. He could be a Kimbior type. Looks to be just getting primed for a big handicap, in my opinion. His chase mark in Ireland is only 132 compared to his hurdles mark 135. Hasn't really been given a winnable chance since his chase debut, where he jumped really well and looked impressive. I have no doubt he'll pop up somewhere and prove very popular in the betting. So just keep an eye on when he appears in a handicap. And then finally, in the county hurdle, Zenta, another horse I like to get priced up myself with some bookmakers. She caught my eye because she's entered in Liffey at the DRF, having made an interesting chase debut. Obviously, only an ex-juvenile coming into this season. To me, didn't look a complete natural, as she was pitched into a Grade 2 on that occasion. So she'll retain her novice chase status should they maintain it. She has a mark of 138 in Ireland. And bearing in mind, she finished close up to Gala Marceau and Lossiemouth, who were the two market leaders for the mares hurdle. She could be up to defying a mark 138 in Ireland. It'll be interesting if they go down that route. Or again, if they come over to Cheltenham for the county hurdle on a track she's already run really well out. She's a 5-year-old, and obviously Willie won this with State Man and Samoa, who are also 5-year-olds. Mares have done exceedingly well in handicaps at Cheltenham recently as well. And Pied Piper was second in the county hurdle last year off a massive weight as a 5-year-old. So keep an eye on her. If she runs in any 2-mile handicap, she'll be of massive interest to me.
Okay, so those 6 total Cheltenham handicap shortlists. Go through them again, Dan, just so people have them if they were listening, saying go through them one by one.
Sure. So the Fred Winter Batman Chirac. In the Coral Cup, Sam Majest, the Grand Annual Fernando Civila, but keep an eye if he runs this weekend. I prefer him to go there fresh. In the Plate, Safara, and the Kimyor, Percival Legalwa, and in the County Hurdle, Zenta.
Okay, yeah, Matt. When you're doing Cheltenham handicap and we talk about when to pull the trigger on the show, it's one of the feature on the show. Obviously, weights you're going to tend to pull the trigger at least post weights, but you can't just like turn up cold on the day and start your prep there. Your prep probably starts the Saturday after Cheltenham when you're watching the national. That's on the Saturday after Cheltenham.
Yeah, the Midlands National. Yeah, to some extent, yeah, you definitely want a list for when you go away in the summer. So you've got that when you come back in the autumn. Different handicaps potentially at different times. As a rough rule of thumb, the more predictable the handicap, something like the Ultima, then I'd rather get stuck into that earlier on because the winners tend to shorten. Where you've got very unpredictable handicaps, say the Grand Annual, then they tend to be defensively priced anti-post, and so you may get the winner at a bigger price on the day. But you need to look at them all individually. So one handicap I wanted to mention that's changed radically, the Pertemps final, because last year the number of qualifiers per race was cut by a third from 6 to 4. Prior to that, there were typically a double-figure number of horses balloted out, mark around the mid-130s needed to get a run. Last year, 24 were declared for 24 places. The last in was dead on the bottom weight of 10-2 off 121. Now, if this year is similar to last, then pretty much anything that is qualified and wants a run can get one. So even before their entries in February, there are a manageable number of horses to start assessing. With 11 of the 16 qualifiers run, there are only 43 horses qualified at the moment. Not many of them that are easy to fancy. So if you are itching to get stuck into the handicaps, the race I'd suggest starting to research now with a view to betting once the weights come out and you know the marks of the Irish horses is the Pertemps final.
And Matt, look, you hear a lot of Cheltenham anti-post betting is dead, particularly on Twitter, and completely has changed. And I would overall probably agree with that to a point. But you wrote a really good article on Matchbook Insights last year about it's different sort of anti-post markets,
yeah,
but there is still value. And I think maybe betting early on a handicap's not the wisest thing in the world, but if you can whittle the field down like the Pertemps or the Ultimate that tends to have the same horses every year to a point, then there is still value out there in anti-post betting.
Definitely. And some of the conditions races that we've talked about that are very predictable on the day, unless you want to bet at short prices, we talked about the Gold Cup, Sizing John 41.0 at this stage for his final prep, Coney 35 4.0. Yeah, you want to be backing them anti-post. What's changed, and this is what put a lot of punters off, is you've got all the extra races. So in the novice chase divisions, you've now got the Turners, and the National Hunt Chase has been opened up with the penalties gone and so on. You're not so certain of what's going to go where as you used to be, and that's put a lot of punters off. A lot of the horses in the same hands, so you don't know which way the pack is going to be shuffled at Willie Mullins or Gordon Elliott. So I understand it's not for some people, but there is still lots of value out there. You've got to approach it differently, and you've got to really think about which races are anti-post races. Some are excellent anti-post races. I've just mentioned a couple. Some, like, for example, the Albert Bartlett, very unpredictable and defensively priced anti-post, so you get a bigger price during festival week. They're the sort of races that you want to leave alone.
Yeah, Dan, final word to you on anti-post betting. Like, I would tend to agree with a lot of what Matt said there, that there is still value out there. Like, look, Supreme a few years ago was 8-1 co-favourites. That's just not going to happen anymore. We let Annie Power go off 3.5. I tweeted out the other day in a champion hurdle favourite. I don't know if that happens these days. But anti-post wise, there's just different. You got to go about it a little bit differently, I think.
Well, you do, exactly. The structure just completely changed even a few years ago. And I think the bookmakers now are so defensively minded when it comes to any liabilities at big prices that they just have to take heed of that. And you have to be aware of that. And I think, as you guys have always mentioned on this show, it's all about timing. Like, there's a horse you fancy to go well at the weekend, get in ahead of that, because you're not going to get anywhere near that price should things go your way. You have to take a few risks here and there, because ultimately there's no sports without risk. But it's all about, just as Matt said, picking out the right races where they're accessible, picking a horse you think has the profile to go well, and getting it in before they put in a good performance. Obviously, there are going to be some disappointments. Not every slip you place is going to be in a good position come the day. That's part of the risk you have to just accept. But if you can get to the day with a decent handful of very good prices, in the long run, if you can be ahead of the game, that's how you're going to do it.
Okay, we're done. Dan, did you enjoy that?
Anytime to talk about Cheltenham, I always enjoy it. Absolutely. Yeah, and bringing off a list of 6 handicappers, and we haven't got entries, weights, or anything. That's my cup of tea.
Yeah, you'll definitely get a tweet or two about that, and rightly so. Rightly so, to be fair.
Yeah,
thanks to Dan,
absolutely. I deserve all the abuse I get.
Yeah, rightly so. Rightly so. My thanks, as always, as well, to Matt Toombs, who will be back next week alongside Donn McClean and alongside a special guest, which I'm really tempted not to spoil, but I will spoil for anyone who stayed this long into the podcast. Micheál Deese will be making his return to your screen, so stay tuned for next Tuesday, 12 p.m. The return of the Deese with some interesting Cheltenham anti-post cliff horses, which I'm trying to talk him out of prior to him revealing that to the viewers. But we will stay in tune for that. Check out the Matchbook Horse Racing podcast, previewing Cheltenham Trials Day, and we'll be back same time, same place next week. Until then, enjoy the horse racing. Bye bye.